The house felt more like a museum exhibit now, hollow with the faint scent of something long decayed. My fingers worked in a methodical rhythm, folding clothes I wasn't sure I'd ever wear again, packing the few things I was determined to take. What was left behind, strewn and broken, could rot for all I cared. I picked up a framed photo from the edge of the shelf, me and Samantha, 2 years ago, smiles stretched across our faces, locked in a perfect moment that was anything but perfect now. I thought I'd feel something as I stared at it. Anger, maybe? Regret? Love? I let it fall, the crack of glass splitting the silence. Nothing but shards and an empty smile. I traced a path through the house, eyes catching on memories I couldn't look away from. Our life together had been built on words that felt solid, promises we made while saving every cent toward a future that was supposed to mean something. I stopped by the window, staring out at the yard we used to dream of renovating, the garden Samantha always said would bloom into something beautiful. Lies. My throat tightened, bile rising as I forced myself to keep moving. There was no room for weakness. 2 months ago, everything shifted. It started with something small, a moment so inconsequential that, at first, I dismissed it. She was late coming home again, barely making eye contact as she mumbled about work deadlines and collapsed into bed without a word. There had been a time when I would have asked questions, maybe teased her about burning out. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, the cold inches between us and the bed expanding until they might as well have been miles. When did I know? Maybe it was when she stopped laughing at my stupid jokes or when she began locking her phone as if it held state secrets. But I couldn't pinpoint a single moment. It was the accumulation of 1,000 little betrayals that I hadn't wanted to see. Until I did. The text came through one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I'd been at home, sifting through bills and trying to figure out where the money had been slipping away. The vibration of her phone on the kitchen counter was barely audible, but I heard it. Maybe I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity can be a vicious master. The message glared at me, the words casual, intimate, and damning. Last weekend was perfect. Can't wait for next time, babe. My chest went tight, blood pounding so loudly that for a second I thought I'd been struck deaf. I read it again, the syllables as lethal as any weapon. Next time perfect. How many times had there already been? I should have exploded then. Ripped the phone apart, stormed out, demanded answers. But what would be the point? Confronting her right away would leave me with nothing but more lies and an even deeper wound. Instead, I swallowed every bitter emotion and did the only thing I could think of. I kept quiet. Silent, cold, calculating. I'd never considered myself capable of anything resembling ruthlessness, but betrayal is a bitter teacher. Over the next few days, I became the perfect actor. Samantha barely noticed the change. Maybe she thought I was preoccupied, distracted by work or stress. It wasn't difficult to act as if everything was normal because that was exactly what she wanted to see. I bided my time, collecting evidence like a detective who knew his case was about to implode spectacularly. Her behavior continued in its predictable patterns: more late nights, carefully neutral conversations, the brief flicker of guilt in her eyes that vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. But I wasn't imagining any of it. When I finally combed through our credit card statements, I wanted to scream. Thousands of dollars bled from our savings, money we'd scraped together for a down payment on our future, siphoned away on five-star hotels, expensive gifts, and clandestine weekends. Each entry was another knife twisting in my chest. She hadn't just betrayed me with someone else. She'd taken what we built together and used it to fund her affair. The rage was a physical thing, sitting in my throat, clawing at my self-control. I wanted to storm into our bedroom, drag her into the living room, and force her to explain herself. But I didn't. Instead, I started my own quiet revolution. Sitting at the kitchen table one night, I stared at the spreadsheets that mapped out what was left of our accounts. I called in a few favors meetings with financial advisors who owed me no loyalty to Samantha. I played my cards carefully, slowly transferring funds, making withdrawals, building a safety net under a guise she'd never suspect. Samantha continued her charade, and I let her. There were moments when she caught me watching her, a faint question in her eyes, but I made sure to smile, to offer her what she needed. The truth would come soon enough. There was one night, just a week before everything fell apart, when I almost broke. She came home late again, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize. She stood in the doorway, tired and drained. For a moment, I almost asked where she'd been, hoping for a lie that would at least let me believe we could pretend. But I bit my tongue, swallowing down the bitterness. The lies weren't worth anything, and neither was she. So, I waited. Watched. Let the storm brew until it was ready to break. I stood in the shadows of our hallway that night, listening to the muffled sounds of Samantha moving about the bedroom. She was humming to herself, something light in content, a tune I couldn't place. But it didn't matter. It was an insult. That simple sound mocking everything I'd been pretending not to know. My hand clenched around the edge of the wall, every muscle tensed as if poised to strike. But rage is a dangerous thing left unchecked. It consumes everything, leaving nothing but ashes. I needed more than fire. I needed precision. Temptation clawed at me to march in there and let the flood of anger drown us both. To force a confrontation, make her look me in the eyes and explain every stolen cent and whispered secret. But no. Confrontation meant giving her a chance to twist the narrative, to feign remorse or worse, blame me for driving her away. She'd always been good at spinning stories and I'd played the fool for too long. If she was going to burn, I would make sure it was by her own hand. The next morning, I acted like everything was fine. I cooked breakfast eggs, toast, even sliced up an orange, arranging it neatly on her plate. Samantha wandered into the kitchen with damp hair, glancing at me like she couldn't quite place the familiarity between us. "Wow," she said, a forced smile touching her lips. "You're in a good mood today." "Just felt like it," I replied, keeping my tone breezy. Thought we could use a nice morning for once. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, this strained, polite exchange between two strangers pretending to be lovers. But I slid the plate in front of her, masking the poison beneath the sweetness. She murmured something about appreciating the effort and sat down, scrolling through her phone as she ate. I wondered if it was him she was texting, if every bite she took tasted like betrayal. While she showered, I slipped into our study and made the final arrangements. Liquidating assets isn't simple, but I'd become meticulous. I called the bank, confirmed the transfers. Within days, our joint accounts would be emptied, all funneled into a new account solely under my name. It was ruthless. Yes, but fair wasn't part of this game anymore. She'd played her cards, now it was my turn. Every day felt like a high-wire act, balancing between seething rage and icy composure. At night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close I was to ending it. Samantha was deep in her own world, either too secure in my obliviousness or too careless to notice. I watched her come and go, always a step ahead. Her routines had become predictable late nights, too many urgent projects, and the faint scent of cologne that didn't belong to me. The evening before I planned to make my move, I followed her. I told her I was working late, then parked a few blocks from our house and waited. I watched as she left, glancing around nervously before getting into her car. I trailed her at a distance, adrenaline coursing through me like a poison. She drove across town to a sleek hotel, the kind we used to fantasize about staying at when we had enough money to splurge. My grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. I didn't need to see more, but I waited anyway, watching her meet him in the lobby. They laughed, oblivious to the world around them, oblivious to me. By the time she returned home, I was already there, reading a book on the couch. The sight of her entering, reeking of her betrayal, made me want to scream. Instead, I looked up and smiled. "How was work?" I asked, knowing every ounce of casualness was a knife I was sinking deeper. She hesitated, just for a second, then slipped back into her lie. "Long," she said, "but I think we made progress." "Good," I replied, and turned the page. The morning of my planned departure, I woke before her. Everything had been prepared. My suitcase was packed and waiting in the garage. Our bank accounts were drained, the house left in her name, along with the mountain of bills she'd ignored while I prepared my escape. I made coffee and waited for her to stir. When she did, she wandered into the kitchen like any other day, yawning, hair tangled from sleep. I forced myself to look at her as she poured her coffee. Really look. There was a time I would have reached for her waist, pressed my lips to her neck. Now I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of knowing this was the last time I'd see her like this. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at me. "You seem quiet." "Just thinking," I replied. "I'll be out for most of the day. Busy schedule." "Okay," she said, already turning away, lost in her own world. I watched her for a long moment, memorizing the sight. Then I stood, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, locking it behind me one last time. I spent the next hour making the final moves. Account closures, signing off on paperwork, ensuring that everything was ironclad. I moved like a ghost through the remnants of our life together, detached, hollow. When it was done, I returned home to leave the final message. On the kitchen table, I placed a note. Nothing dramatic. Just a few words that hinted at the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. "You should check our bank balance." I imagined her face when she read it, the slow realization that she'd gambled everything and lost. It was enough. The silence was oppressive as I walked out for the last time. No grand farewells, no second chances, just me and the weight of everything I was leaving behind. I didn't feel free, I felt raw, scraped clean of whatever illusions I'd once held. But I was done pretending. Samantha's secrets had cost us everything, and now she could have what was left, the hollow shell of a life she'd ruined. The day unraveled with a strange kind of stillness. My phone was off, the weight of what I'd done pressing on me with every breath. I drove aimlessly, stopping at a diner miles away where no one knew my face. The coffee tasted like ash, but it didn't matter. The minutes dragged on, my mind replaying Samantha's likely reaction. I pictured her walking into the kitchen, her eyes catching the folded note on the table. Maybe she'd roll her eyes at first, thinking it was a petty jab. But then she'd open her phone, check the accounts, and feel the ground rip away beneath her feet. I tried to find satisfaction in imagining her panic, her desperate calls to the bank, her frantic messages to me. She would realize soon enough that everything was gone, our savings, her safety net, every cent she'd spent building a fantasy at my expense. I'd taken it all, left nothing but emptiness. For a moment, that thought felt good. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by a deep exhaustion. Winning felt hollow. Revenge didn't heal wounds, it only exposed how deep they really were. Hours later, I parked outside a small motel. The vacancy sign flickered, casting a red glow on my windshield. I checked in using cash, tossing my bag onto the lumpy bed. The silence was unbearable, pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake. I turned on the TV, the volume low. Nothing made sense, every sound too loud, every flickering image reminding me of how far I'd fallen. I tried to sleep, but the darkness only made space for my thoughts. By morning, my phone had lit up with dozens of messages. Samantha's name appeared over and over, missed calls, voicemails, texts that grew more frantic by the hour. I listened to the first voicemail, her voice breaking. "James, what the hell is this? Where's the money? Call me back." I deleted it. Another came through moments later. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to talk to me. You can't just." Her voice cracked, and for a second I heard fear, genuine fear. I deleted that one too. By the time I reached the last few messages, she had shifted to rage. Accusations, threats, claims that I was cruel, vindictive, heartless. Maybe she was right. I didn't care. Days passed like this. I ignored every attempt she made to reach me, every plea and demand. I knew what she'd become without the safety net I'd taken away. Desperation makes people ugly, and Samantha's calls made that clear. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to find some way to manipulate me, to twist reality back in her favor. But I'd stopped caring about her version of the story. It was over. One afternoon, I made the mistake of picking up. Maybe I wanted to hear her voice one last time, to test whether I'd made the right choice. Her tone was brittle, venomous. "How dare you do this to me?" She spat. "Do you know what you've done? You can't just walk away like this." "I already did," I replied, my voice hollow. "You made your choices, Samantha. I made mine." "You don't get to be the victim here," she snapped. "I messed up, okay? But this? Destroying everything? That's on you." There was a pause, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. "Come back. We can fix this." Fix? The word was laughable. A cruel joke. I'd spent months suffocating under the weight of her betrayal, and now she wanted to pretend it could be salvaged. "No," I said, the finality in my voice echoing through the line. I hung up before she could say anything else, blocking her number. For good. There were days when I second-guessed myself. Revenge had been a bitter remedy, and the scars left behind weren't ones that healed quickly. I drifted from motel to motel, eventually settling in a cramped apartment far from the life we'd built. Every morning I reminded myself that leaving was the right choice, even if it didn't feel that way. I threw myself into rebuilding a job that paid little but kept my mind busy, anonymous faces that passed by without asking questions. It was what I needed. Months later, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. I almost threw it away, but curiosity won. Inside was a short note, scrawled hastily. "You took everything, James. I hope you're happy." Nothing more. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done to bring us here. I burned it in the sink, watching the paper curl and blacken. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing it hurt. Some nights I walked along the beach, letting the salt air fill my lungs, staring out at the endless expanse of water. It felt fitting, empty, unpredictable, and vast. I thought about the man I'd been before all this, trusting, hopeful, naive. That version of me was gone. Samantha hadn't just betrayed me, she'd carved out pieces of who I was, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But I was still standing. That had to mean something. There were moments of tentative hope, flickers of light in the darkness. I met people who didn't know my story. who saw me as just another face in the crowd. It was a relief, a chance to rebuild without the weight of my past dragging me down. I wasn't healed, not fully, but I was trying. I refused to let her be the chapter that defined me forever. Samantha had taken so much, but she didn't get to keep my future. So I kept walking, one step at a time, away from the ruins and toward whatever lay beyond. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough.